A 20-year-old college student vanishes into the night. No struggle. No scream. No goodbye. One moment she's laughing with friends, the next, she's gone. For nearly a decade, her mother clings to hope, clutching a fading photo, waiting for a knock that never comes. And the man who knows what really happened? He blends back into ordinary life. He goes to work. Drives the same roads. Passes the same street corners where search parties once called Lindsay's name into the darkness. This is the story of Lynsie Ekelund, a bright, determined young woman who dreamed of telling stories for a living. A daughter who would never stop fighting to find her place in the world, even when the world seemed determined to forget her. Tonight, we're going back to the early hours of February 17, 2001, Placentia, California. A quiet community just outside Los Angeles. It's here, behind an ordinary front door, that Lindsay's mother, Lynsie Ekelund, wakes to an empty bed. Her daughter's room is exactly how she left it. But Lindsay herself is nowhere to be found. Where did Lindsay go? Did she run away? Did she trust the wrong person? Was she even dropped off at home like they said? Detectives start with what little they have, Lindsay's friends. But there's no trace of Lindsay. No neighbors hear a thing. No surveillance cameras catch her final steps. The streets are silent, and Lindsay's name fades from the headlines as quickly as it appeared. But Lynsie never gives up. She puts up missing posters. Call every tip line. Begs local news to keep her daughter's face alive. For 9 long years, she wakes each morning hoping today is the day the phone will ring. Behind the scenes, investigators dig, but the trail is cold. They have no witnesses, no crime scene, no body. How does a young woman vanish in plain sight? And why did it take 9 years to learn the truth? Stay with me, because what police would finally uncover, would break this case wide open. If you want to help keep Lindsay's story alive, please hit like and subscribe, it helps more people like you know. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your child vanished without a trace? This story has a twist you won't see coming, and you'll want to stay till the very end. To understand how a young woman could simply vanish, you have to know who Lynsie Ekelund was before she became a face on a missing poster. Lindsay was born in 1981. The child of Lynsie Ekelund, a single mother who raised her daughter in the quiet Orange County suburb of Placentia, California. Lindsay had been involved in a car accident when she was 5 years old and it left her partially paralyzed on her left side even after 28 surgeries, but she didn't let it slow her down. She was fiercely independent, stubborn, her friends would say. Always pushing to do things on her own terms. She didn't drive yet, but that didn't stop her from making plans. She wanted to be a broadcast journalist. Lindsay wasn't the kind of young woman you'd expect to disappear. She was the kind of person who'd stand out in a crowd, bright hazel eyes, quick to smile. At home, she and her mother Lynsie were more like best friends than mother and daughter. They'd watch TV together. Talk about Lindsay's classes, her future. They bickered like sisters sometimes. Lynsie said Lindsay always thought she knew best. But Lynsie didn't mind. She loved her daughter's fire. That same fire, she believed, would carry Lindsay into a bright future. But no one knew that the future was about to be stolen, in the space of a single night. On February 16th, she tells her mom she's going to stay with a friend. That's it. Nothing unusual. She'd done it before. Lynsie didn't ask too many questions. Lindsay was 20, old enough to make her own choices. But that night, instead of staying in, Lindsay hops into a car with 3 people, Andrea, Amy, and a 23-year-old man, Christopher McCamus, a young construction worker. McCamus was an acquaintance, someone Lindsay knew from school through mutual friends. He was older, owned a car. Seemed harmless. They climbed into his white pickup truck and headed to San Diego for a night of clubbing. San Diego was only a couple hours away, far enough to feel like freedom, close enough to be back by morning. Somewhere around 4 a.m., they reached Placentia again. Andrea and Amy were dropped off first. Then, Christopher McCamus told police, he drove Lynsie to her neighborhood. She didn't want him to pull into the driveway, he said. She asked him to stop at the corner. She'd walk the rest of the way so she wouldn't wake her mom. And so McCamus said he watched her step out of his truck. He said he saw her walk away into the shadows, but Lynsie Ekelund would never walk through her front door again. When Lynsie Ekelund woke up that morning, she expected to find her daughter asleep in her bedroom. She peered inside, but the bed was empty. Maybe Lindsay had gone out again, she thought. Maybe she'd come home late and gone to a friend's house. Hours passed. The phone never rang. The house was silent. By the end of that day, Nancy knew something was wrong. Lindsay wasn't answering her cell. On February 19, 2001, 3 days later, Nancy called the police. She told them her daughter never came home. Officers took the report. They questioned neighbors. No one saw Lindsay walk down the street that night. No cameras. No witnesses. No trail. At first, there were whispers. Maybe Lindsay ran away. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she'd show up at the door tomorrow with an embarrassed smile. What would you do first if your child didn't come home? Call the police? Wait it out? Let me know in the comments, because for Lynsie Ekelund, waiting was agony. And for Lindsay, time was already running out. Days turned to weeks, and Lindsay didn't come home. Flyers went up on telephone poles. Nancy spoke to every reporter who'd listen. Search parties combed the neighborhood. Police brought in everyone who'd been with her that night. First, Andrea and Amy, 2 young women who insisted they parted ways with nothing unusual happening. Christopher McCamus sat in a small interview room at the Placentia Police Department. Calm. Cooperative. He said the same thing every time. I dropped her off on her street. She didn't want to wake her mom, so she asked to be let out near the corner. She walked away. I watched her go. The story never changed. There were no signs of a struggle in McCamus' truck. No suspicious scratches. No blood. No defensive wounds. And the street where he claimed he dropped her off was dark, empty, lined with identical suburban homes. Nobody saw anything. There were no security cameras catching that final moment. In 2001, most neighborhoods didn't have them. And there was no physical evidence to hold McCamus, or anyone else, accountable. Some people said they'd seen her in Las Vegas. Others claimed she'd been spotted crossing the border into Mexico. But every lead collapsed under scrutiny. Tips led nowhere. Every promising clue ended in dead ends and disappointment. And so the story faded from the front page. The reporters packed up their cameras. The neighbors lowered their porch lights. But behind closed doors, one person refused to move on. The case went cold, but Lindsay's mother never gave up. If Lindsay's story disappeared from the news, it didn't disappear from her mother's life. Lynsie Ekelund made missing posters flyers with Lindsay's smiling face and the date she vanished. She drove around Orange County, taping them to bus stops, telephone poles, grocery store windows. She called local news anchors, pleading for coverage every anniversary. She joined support groups for families of the missing, traded tips, asked questions, hunted for any scrap of hope. Once a year, Nancy would hold a vigil. Tiny flickers of candlelight pushing back the darkness that had swallowed her daughter. Friends, neighbors, even strangers gathered in silence. Some prayed. Some just waited, hoping Lindsay might somehow hear them and find her way home. But the years dragged on. The tips kept coming, every one of them false hope. The case file grew thicker, but it contained no answers. Only one thing never changed, Nancy's gut. She never believed Lindsay ran away. Not for a second. Her daughter had dreams. A life. A future she talked about. And Nancy was sure of one thing: someone out there knew exactly what happened. And they were living their life like nothing had ever happened. Do you believe in gut feelings? Nancy always said a mother knows. She knew Lindsay didn't run away. What do you think? Is a mother's instinct ever wrong? Tell me in the comments. By 2009, Lynsie Ekelund's case was a file buried in a dusty drawer. But then, almost a decade later, a pair of fresh eyes changed everything. A new team of detectives joined the Placentia Police Department's cold case unit. One detective, in particular, was haunted by Lindsay's file. He read every page, every interview transcript. And one detail kept nagging at him: Christopher McCamus. McCamus had never been arrested. Never slipped up. But in nearly every missing persons case, the last person to see the victim alive knows more than they say. So the new detectives decided to knock on McCamus' door one more time. By now, McCamus was 31 years old. When detectives called him in, he didn't look worried. He told the same story. But the new detectives pushed harder this time. They picked at tiny inconsistencies. Where exactly did he stop the truck? Which street corner? What time did he get home? As the questions piled up, McCamus started to slip. The detectives knew they had something, but they needed more. They dug into McCamus' work history. Where had he been working back in 2001? Did he have access to remote sites, places to hide a secret? They pulled his cell phone records. Checked construction sites he worked at back then. Every detail painted the same picture. Christopher McCamus had the opportunity. He had the means. And now, after nearly a decade of silence, he was running out of excuses. What the police did next would uncover the secret Christopher McCamus thought he'd buried forever. In the sterile hum of the interrogation room, McCamus held on to his story. But when detectives showed him the evidence, how nothing lined up anymore, how his own words betrayed him, the cracks split wide open. He started with half-truths. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became: something terrible had happened that night. Finally, after 9 years of silence, Christopher McCamus confessed. He told detectives that after dropping Andrea and Amy off, he drove Lindsay back to his place because she wanted to sleep over at his place as it was late and she didn't want to upset her mom. Then he tried to kiss her, she pushed him away. He went to the kitchen, drank a lot of vodka and went back, tried to make advances towards her again. She got up, grabbed his home phone and tried to dial 911 to call the police, and being drunk, he was enraged, grabbed her, threw her on his bed and got her into a headlock and she died. He kept her lifeless body in his truck, drove her to a remote construction site in Santa Clarita where he'd been working, and buried Lynsie Ekelund. Detectives asked for proof. Forensic experts found human remains exactly where McCamus said he buried her. DNA confirmed the impossible truth: Lynsie Ekelund had been there all along while her mother waited for answers. Could this have been avoided? Should he have been caught sooner? Tell me in the comments. Because for 9 years, McCamus lived free while Nancy waited at her window. In 2012, Christopher McCamus stood in a packed Orange County courtroom. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He had agreed to reveal where Lindsay was buried in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. In that same courtroom, Lynsie Ekelund finally spoke the words she'd been carrying for nearly a decade. Christopher McCamus was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Some say it wasn't enough. Others say it was justice, at last, justice built on the relentless love of a mother who never stopped asking questions. Outside the courthouse, people gathered one last time to say goodbye, candles in hand, Lindsay's name whispered in prayers and tears. She had been gone for nearly a decade, but she was finally home. If you stayed with me till the end, thank you. Stories like Lindsay's take weeks of research and care to tell right. Please, If you want more true crime stories that demand answers, like this video, subscribe, and share Lindsay's story so she's never forgotten. And if you have thoughts, theories, or want to share your own story, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Long after the court doors closed and the cameras switched off, Lynsie Ekelund's story remains, not as a headline or a case file, but as a reminder that sometimes, the monsters we fear most don't lurk in dark alleys or deserted highways. They sit beside us in cars. They call themselves friends. They slip into our lives with easy smiles and polite nods. But the truth, the real truth, was always waiting beneath the surface, buried just deep enough for everyone to forget, except for one person. Lynsie Ekelund was never a detective. She didn't wear a badge or carry a gun. But she had something more powerful than any uniform, the quiet certainty that her daughter's voice would not be lost to time. It was that certainty, that stubborn hope, that forced a cold case unit to look again. That forced a killer to slip. That finally brought Lindsay home. There will always be questions. Why did it take so long? How many clues were missed? How many more like Lindsay are out there, waiting to be found? In the end, justice came, but was it enough? A guilty plea. 15 years to life. No trial. No cross-examination. Just a confession traded for a grave's location under someone's future living room. So tonight, I'll leave you with a question, and I hope you'll answer it below. Do you think justice was truly served? Was it enough? Or does Lynsie Ekelund's story deserve something more? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you found Lindsay's story important, if you believe stories like hers should never be forgotten, please, take a second to like this video. It really helps get these cases seen by more people, so these names don't fade into old files and dusty news archives. And if you're new here, subscribe. Every week, I bring you deep dive true crime stories that deserve to be told, with the care and time they need. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, no one should ever vanish without a trace.